Have you ever imagined boarding a luxury cruise ship, expecting 7 days of relaxation, music, endless buffets, and beautiful ocean views, only to suddenly find yourself trapped in complete darkness while thousands of people scream around you? Because on January 13th, 2012, that nightmare became real. More than 4,000 people were on board one of the most luxurious cruise ships in Europe. Families were enjoying dinner, couples were dancing, children were running through the massive hallways. Everything felt perfect. And then, one wrong decision changed everything. Within minutes, the ship struck rocks near the coast of Italy. Water began pouring inside, electricity failed, panic spread across the decks, and the massive cruise liner that was supposed to represent luxury and safety slowly began leaning into the sea. But what shocked the world even more was what the captain did next. Tonight, we're diving into the terrifying true story of the Costa Concordia disaster. The disaster that exposed chaos, fear, human error, and one of the most controversial evacuations in modern maritime history. Now let's begin. A floating luxury city. When the Costa Concordia entered service in 2006, it was considered one of the crown jewels of European cruising. The ship was enormous, over 950 feet long, carrying thousands of passengers, complete with luxury suites, restaurants, swimming pools, theaters, bars, shopping areas, and even a giant spa. For many travelers, boarding the ship felt like entering a floating city. The cruise line promised elegance, comfort, and unforgettable vacations across the Mediterranean Sea. And on January 13, 2012, passengers from around the world boarded the ship in Italy for what was supposed to be another peaceful voyage. Nobody on board knew they were about to become part of one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history. The captain's dangerous decision. The ship's captain that night was Francesco Schettino. Experienced, confident, well-known in the cruise industry. But according to investigations later, the captain decided to perform something called a salute. This was an unofficial maneuver where cruise ships passed unusually close to shore so people on land could see the vessel up close. It looked impressive, but it was risky, very risky. As the massive ship approached the Italian island of Giglio, passengers inside had no idea the ship was moving dangerously close to underwater rocks. Everything still felt normal. People were eating dinner. Wine glasses clinked. Music played through the restaurants. Crew members smiled at guests. And then, at around 9:45 p.m., a horrifying grinding sound ripped through the ship. Metal screamed against rock. The entire vessel violently shook. Passengers were thrown sideways. Plates shattered across dining rooms. And for a few seconds, nobody understood what had just happened.
Was that an explosion? Many passengers initially thought there had been some kind of engine failure or explosion. The lights flickered. Then, parts of the ship lost power completely. Dark hallways filled with confused people trying to understand the situation. Meanwhile, below deck, the reality was catastrophic. The impact had ripped open a massive hole in the side of the ship. Seawater began flooding inside at terrifying speed. Critical systems started failing, and the ship slowly began tilting. At first, the angle seemed small, but minute by minute it became worse. Passengers now struggled to walk properly. Furniture slid across rooms. Glasses smashed onto floors. Some people started panicking immediately. Others still believed the crew had everything under control. But one major problem made the situation even more dangerous. The evacuation was delayed. Confusion turns into panic. One of the biggest criticisms after the disaster was the lack of clear communication. Passengers repeatedly asked crew members what was happening, but many were told everything was fine. Some announcements even claimed there was only an electrical issue. Meanwhile, people could literally see the ship leaning further into the ocean. Imagine being trapped inside a giant floating hotel, feeling the floor tilt beneath your feet while nobody gives you real answers. That confusion quickly turned into fear. Parents grabbed their children, people rushed toward lifeboat stations, others returned to cabins trying to collect passports, phones, jewelry, or life jackets. But every passing minute made evacuation harder, because the more the ship tilted, the more impossible it became to launch lifeboats safely. The moment people realized they could die. Eventually, panic fully exploded on board. Passengers began screaming through hallways. Some cried. Others pushed through crowds, trying desperately to reach the upper decks. Crew members from different countries struggled to communicate instructions in multiple languages. And outside, the ship continued leaning closer and closer to disaster. Some lifeboats launched successfully. Others became impossible to use because of the extreme angle of the vessel. Imagine standing on a deck that suddenly feels more like a wall than a floor. People slipped, fell, grabbed railings to avoid sliding. Elderly passengers struggled to move. Children cried in terror. And in the middle of all this chaos, one question spread among passengers. Where is the captain? The captain controversy. As rescue operations continued, authorities later discovered something shocking. Captain Francesco Schettino had left the ship before many passengers were evacuated. That revelation caused worldwide outrage, because in maritime tradition, the captain is expected to remain on board until everyone else is safe. Audio recordings later released to the public became infamous. In one recording, an Italian Coast Guard officer repeatedly ordered the captain to return to the ship. The conversation sounded tense, angry, and unbelievable. Around the world, people were stunned. How could a disaster on this scale become even more controversial? But for the passengers still trapped on board, survival mattered more than anything. Fighting to escape. Inside the ship, conditions became terrifying. Hallways turned sideways, furniture blocked exits, water entered lower areas, and darkness made navigation even harder. Some passengers had to climb through tilted corridors just to reach safety. Others jumped into freezing water near the shore. Rescue boats and helicopters rushed toward the scene as nearby residents watched the disaster unfold from land. For many people on the island nearby, the sight looked unreal. A massive luxury cruise ship was slowly collapsing onto its side, only a short distance from shore. It looked like something from a movie, except this was real, and people were still trapped inside.
Heroes during the chaos. Even during disasters, stories of courage always emerge. Some crew members stayed behind, helping passengers reach lifeboats. Rescuers entered dangerous parts of the ship, searching for survivors. Strangers helped strangers. Parents carried children through dark stairwells. Couples held hands, believing they might not survive. One of the most emotional parts of disasters like this is seeing how ordinary people react when everything falls apart. Some panic, some freeze, and some become heroes. The final position. Eventually, the Costa Concordia rolled dramatically onto its side near the rocky shoreline. The image became one of the most recognizable disaster photographs in modern history. A giant luxury cruise ship, half submerged, lying helplessly beside the coast. It shocked the world, because cruise ships are designed to feel safe, controlled, and almost indestructible. But this disaster reminded everyone of one terrifying reality. Even the largest ships on Earth can become vulnerable in seconds. The human cost. By the end of the disaster, 32 people lost their lives, and many more were injured or traumatized. Some survivors later described the event as absolute chaos. Others said they never wanted to board another cruise ship again. For families of victims, the disaster became a lifelong tragedy. And for the cruise industry, it became a wake-up call. Because investigators would soon begin asking difficult questions. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? And why were passengers not evacuated sooner? The investigation. The investigation into the Costa Concordia disaster lasted years. Authorities examined navigation data, crew actions, emergency procedures, and decisions made before impact. Investigators concluded that the ship sailed too close to shore. Human error played a massive role, and emergency response on board was heavily criticized. Captain Francesco Schettino eventually faced trial and was convicted of multiple charges connected to the disaster. The case became international news for years, but beyond the courtroom drama, the images from that night remained unforgettable. Thousands of terrified passengers, dark, tilted hallways, lifeboats lowering beside a sinking ship, and the haunting silence after the chaos ended. The massive salvage operation. But the story wasn't still over, because removing the wreck itself became one of the largest maritime salvage operations ever attempted. The ship was enormous. Engineers faced a nearly impossible challenge. How do you remove a gigantic cruise ship lying on its side near a rocky coastline without causing environmental disaster? The operation took years. Massive underwater platforms were built. Giant metal structures were attached to the wreck. Eventually, engineers managed to slowly rotate the ship upright in a process watched around the world. It was an incredible engineering achievement. And finally, the remains of the ship were towed away for scrapping. But even after the wreck disappeared, the story never truly faded. Why this disaster still fascinates people. More than a decade later, millions of people still watch documentaries and videos about the disaster. Why? Because it combines everything humans fear most: loss of control, darkness, isolation, human error, and the terrifying realization that luxury and comfort can disappear instantly. Cruise ships are designed to feel like paradise. That's what makes disasters like this so disturbing. Passengers board expecting safety, relaxation, escape from everyday life, not panic and survival. Lessons the cruise industry learned. After the disaster, cruise safety procedures changed in major ways. Emergency drills became stricter, crew training improved, navigation rules became more serious. Cruise companies realized passengers needed faster communication during emergencies, because confusion can become just as dangerous as the disaster itself. And even today, the Costa Concordia disaster is still studied by maritime experts around the world, not just because of the accident, but because of the mistakes that followed it. But perhaps the scariest part of this entire story is how normal the night began. Nobody boarded the ship expecting disaster. Passengers were laughing only minutes before impact. Some were eating dessert. Some were taking photos. Some were probably planning what they would do the next morning. And then, suddenly, their world tilted sideways. That's what makes real disasters so haunting. There's usually no dramatic warning music, no sign that catastrophe is seconds away. Life simply changes without permission. The story of the Costa Concordia disaster remains one of the most chilling cruise disasters of the modern era. Not because it happened in the middle of a violent storm, but because it happened during what should have been a peaceful luxury vacation. A single risky decision triggered panic for thousands of people, and the consequences became unforgettable. Even today, the image of that giant ship lying on its side near the Italian coast still feels surreal. A reminder that no matter how advanced technology becomes, human mistakes can still change everything. So what do you think? Would you ever go on a cruise after hearing this story? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real disaster stories every week.